My name is Sakshi Mani, and I'm going to be talking about the college admissions process. Affirmative action. As described by Cornell University, a set of procedures designed to eliminate unlawful discrimination among applicants, remedy the results of such prior discrimination, and prevent such discrimination in the future. At its core, it's a good purpose. However, as time has gone on, college admissions have steered further away from this original purpose. Debate about affirmative action in the United States has been large, with multiple court cases leading to even some states banning its usage. However, affirmative action is necessary because some students do not have the same opportunities as their peers and may need preference in the college admission system. However, it needs reform because it's not serving this intended purpose anymore. Instead of giving preference to students who need it, it creates racial preference in a way that does not help all people of color. Instead of connecting students to higher education, it creates a system where students perform poorly. In The Dark Side of Resilience, Lusk and Premusic explain if somebody is too resilient, they can become overly tolerant to adversity. And this is what has happened to Asian Americans amidst affirmative action policies in the United States. Andrew Lamb, an interviewer of Yale applicants, explains how Asian Americans will ask him if it's more beneficial for them to mark other instead of Asian on their application. They've become overly tolerant to this adversity in such a way that they're willing to take a whole part of their application out just to get rid of this racial preference. This is because affirmative action has created racial preference in college admissions, resulting in Asian Americans having to work harder to fit the stereotype that they are more intelligent. Nelson Mandela explains in A Long Walk to Freedom, in his time in prison, he had to fight racism and repression just on different terms. And that's what these Asian Americans and low-income white students have to do as well. These students have faced disparities all of their life, and they must continue to fight on different terms in the college admissions process, in the ways of receiving unfair decisions that do not consider the factors going into their application. Thus, the question remains, to what extent should income class be considered in affirmative action policies in the United States college admissions process? Well, I have found that income class must be considered in affirmative action policies. However, it must be considered alongside race. Income class and race should be considered in the following ways. To provide reasoning for lower standardized testing scores, this is because standardized testing is based heavily on wealth, because one of low income cannot pay for tutoring, practice tests, etc. And students must be considered alongside people of the same school or area. This will show if the student excelled among their peers to show if they can handle the academic rigor of a top school. These are the two necessary factors to avoid a student going to a school that they are not prepared for. Affirmative action in its current state has created racial preference in the college admissions process. Former senior fellow at the Century Foundation, Richard Kallenberg, explains how a wealthy African American or Latino applicant will receive preference over a low-income white student or Asian American student. This is a problem because those with wealth have more resources and do not necessarily need the preference in college admissions, while those of low income would. Additionally, Asians don't receive preference, Asians don't compete on a level playing field, instead, Asians do face bias. Due to the stereotype that Asians are more intelligent, they must compete against each other to hit a higher standard than that of any other student. Lusk and Premusic write in The Dark Side of Resilience, competition within groups is less important than between groups. Asians shouldn't have to compete against each other to exceed that standard. Instead, they should at least be able to compete against each other. They should at least be able to compete on the same level playing field as their peers. The current bias in favor of wealthy Black and Latino students completely leaves out students of low income, those that would need the preference for college who do not receive it due to that bias. Now, those that are accepted to college based on affirmative action are then subject to mismatch. Mismatch is when a student is accepted to a college based on affirmative action but perform poorly because they are not properly prepared for that college. UCLA professor Richard Sander finds that about half of Black students rank in the bottom 20% of their classes. Mismatch can lead to switching out of rigorous majors, failing classes, or even dropping out of college. Sander also finds that twice as many Black students are likely to switch out of science and engineering pathways as opposed to white students due to mismatch. If these students went to schools that weren't as rigorous, they would be excelling, but instead they are performing poorly at top schools. However, if affirmative action were to consider both income and race, with a few modifications, racial preference and mismatch could be greatly decreased in the United States college admissions system. The income class of a student must be considered in affirmative action policies because relying on solely race is relying on solely stereotypes. For example, Asians of lower income groups are mixed in with those who aren't of low income groups and are expected to perform the same way they do. But if income class were to be factored into affirmative action policies, these students wouldn't have to achieve that of a stereotypical Asian, but what was achievable for their economic class. And it isn't only people of color who are disadvantaged. There are white Americans who are also of a lower income class and aren't able to have the accomplishments of other white students that need preference as well. If income class was to be considered alongside race, then it would lead to a more socioeconomically diverse campus. One of the main goals of colleges who use affirmative action currently is to have a more diverse campus. If both wealth and race were considered, campuses would be more diverse economically and racially. This would allow affirmative action to continue its purpose of connecting disadvantaged students to higher education and creating a more diverse campus more effectively. Now, some believe that focusing on solely race in affirmative action policies will help increase representation of those historically excluded and will help all students on a college campus through that diversity. However, affirmative action leaves out Asian students as well as low-income students, which means it is not increasing all representation. Research also shows that wealthy Black and Latino students will receive preference, so therefore this argument doesn't stand, because campuses are only getting more diverse through certain races and certain economic classes, which is simply not enough. If wealth and race were both considered, then it would decrease the racial preferences, give preference to low-income students, and create a more diverse campus, one of the main goals of affirmative action. In short, economic class must be considered alongside race. This way, all students that are disadvantaged will receive preference in college admissions. However, if both these things are considered, there is still a possibility that students will be subject to mismatch. This is why, when considering race and low income, college admissions need to use that to explain low standardized testing scores, because there's a large correlation between low scores in race as well as low scores and low income. Therefore, standardized testing should hold less of an impact on admission. There should also be a focus on a student's class rank, because if a student is doing well compared to their peers, it shows that they are able to handle academic rigor, which will help decrease mismatch because students will be admitted based on their performances within people similar to them. With all things considered, income class and race should be considered in affirmative action policies with these changes in the college admissions process. Thank you, and these are my sources.
How did some preliminary information you gathered inform your research?
So when I first started researching, I found an article written for The Atlantic, something along the lines of the truth about affirmative action, and it really went into depth about the racial preferences that is created by affirmative action, and it informed my research because I found that there was an issue with affirmative action, that it wasn't perfect, that it wasn't helping the way it was supposed to, and it brought me to my question to find a better way to have affirmative action policies in a way that's going to help more people without the racial preferences.
And what additional questions emerged from your research, and why are these questions important?
So after researching affirmative action, and I came to the conclusion that income class should be considered, I also came to the conclusion that mismatch could still occur, and I found two ways to change the college admissions process to fix that, and it really brought up the question of what other problems are in the college admissions process, what other processes are hurting people of low income or people of color, because if I was able to find these issues, I was wondering what other issues there are. And these are important questions because it's affecting the future of our workforce, the future of the way people are getting admitted to colleges.
Thank you.